Okay, so you should have watched the film on Teotihuacan, Digging for the Truth. It was an excellent series on the History Channel, and hopefully give you a little bit of an idea of how complex and how sophisticated the city of Teotihuacan was. So let's recap a little bit what was talked about. Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities in the New World. It was one of the largest cities in the ancient world. It probably reached the size of about 200,000 people. So at its time, it was the largest city of the world at its height, which is around 500 AD. You saw that the city was complex, but also it was planned out. There definitely was some organization evident in the plan of the city, which was centered on a grid plan. So you had the Pyramid of the Moon at one end of this main avenue. It was sort of coordinated on the east-west axis. The cardinal points, cardinal directions, are very important in the religion of Mesoamerica. You had the Pyramid of the Sun over here. This was the largest pyramid ever built in the New World. And then you had the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, which we'll talk about over here. The city center was featured around these main religious monuments, but we're going to see that the entire city was much, much larger than just this central area. So this to give you a kind of idea, you saw a little bit from the film, the size of the city, but let's look at a couple of pictures so you can see the scale of some of these buildings. So this is this main avenue called the Avenue of the Dead by archaeologists. The Pyramid of the Moon, Pyramid of the Sun, Avenue of the Dead, those are names that archaeologists gave to these features. We don't know what ancient people actually called them. You could see the volcanic peaks, mountains in the background. Here's the Pyramid of the Moon. This is from the Pyramid of the Moon looking out on the Avenue of the Dead, and you can see the Pyramid of the Sun over here. This is the largest pyramid, again, in the New World. Small temples on either side. And these pyramids are different than the pyramids in Egypt. You can see that in Mesoamerica, Teotihuacan, there are steps here. These are pyramids that were meant to be climbed on. These were not tombs for pharaohs like the pyramids in ancient Egypt. These were temples, so these were used for rituals. So even though you have temples in Egypt and you have temples in another area, it doesn't mean that they're connected. People came up with this architecture on their own. So here's the pyramids over here, here's the temple, but this is the size of Teotihuacan itself. It stretches over an enormous area. And one of the interesting things, and you saw a little bit of this in the film, right? During its inception, it was about 20,000 people. 150 AD, it increased to about 80,000 people. 200 AD, 100,000 people. 500 AD, 150,000 to 200,000 people. This is an exponential growth. This is not just natural population growth. And so this looks like migration of people to Teotihuacan. That is, people from the outside migrating in and deciding to live at Teotihuacan. And they actually were able, in many respects, to demonstrate that this was true. So you saw the burial of those four individuals, and they said that they tested the teeth and they tested the bones of these young warriors. And what they found was that the teeth indicated they had been born somewhere outside of Teotihuacan, but the chemistry of the bones, which changes throughout the person's life, unlike teeth, which stop changing in terms of their chemistry once you reach adulthood, the bones indicated that they lived their adult life at Teotihuacan. And so again, that's more indication that people were moving to Teotihuacan. We're going to see how Teotihuacan handled this influx of migration. So there were warriors, as we said before. We'll look at those burials in a little bit more detail. And it looks like there was a warrior class at Teotihuacan, but Teotihuacan was not a military empire. They were not set on conquering the rest of Mesoamerica. Their focus was actually on trade, and trade with other areas, as we're going to see. Just a little bit more of an idea of the size here. Pyramid of the Sun. You can see the steps that led up to the top. Again, kind of a little bit idea of the size. You can see, when people on it, they look like little ants on an ant hill. This is a little ants right here. This is a super position of the pyramids from Egypt on top, right, of the Pyramid of the Moon. You can see that the Pyramid of the Sun is as big as the pyramids in Egypt in terms of the size it covers. It's about half as tall, but still, we're talking about the same size at the base as the pyramids in Egypt. So these are enormous structures. Right here you can see again pyramids over here. So at the other end, there's the temple of a god in Mesoamerica that was worshipped by many people, called the feathered serpent. The Aztecs referred to this god as as Quetzalcoatl. You can see the feathered serpent right here. So, serpent's head with plumes. And the feathered serpent is the god of the wind. This god next to Quetzalcoatl, or the feathered serpent, is the rain god Tlaloc, which is usually symbolized by these kind of spectacle things over the eyes. Now, this was a important temple at the other end of this avenue, and all of the pyramids and the temple, as you saw in the film, were plastered over with lime plaster and painted. And that may have been one of the reasons why Teotihuacan collapsed. As they talked about in the film, lime plaster requires wood fuel to heat up the limestone with water to produce plaster. And in order to produce enough plaster to constantly plaster over these pyramids, they may have used up so much wood that probably led to agricultural problems. Okay. So this was a very dense population. One of the significant things about Teotihuacan was craft specialization. So for an ancient civilization, it had a very high number of people who were specialists in different kinds of crafts. 1 out of 4 people, or 25% of the population, were craft specialists. That's extremely high. And it means that they were producing goods not just for other people in Teotihuacan to have, but to export outside. And one of these main exports was obsidian. Teotihuacan was right near this volcanic glass source. You saw in the film, it's this volcanic glass obsidian called Pachuca obsidian that's slightly green in color. You find this obsidian all over Mesoamerica, so we know that they were kind of extracting these nodules, taking down, and modifying them into usable cores, and then trading finished products to other areas of Mesoamerica. Just to kind of give you an idea of the scale of the industry, in the beginning of Teotihuacan, around 1 AD, or maybe 48 obsidian workshops. During the height of Teotihuacan, there were 400 obsidian workshops. So they really ramped up production because of trade. That was a real focus of the economy. Another kind of craft were figurines. You can see these figurines are individual. They were made by hand. Each figurine is made individually, piece by piece. You can see the eyes and the hair and things like that. This is very labor intensive. Was there a way to speed up this process? There was, and they figured out a little later that these things could be made by mold. So you can make separate pieces in molds. This is a piece where the other side is unfinished. It was pushed into a mold with your hand. So one side was decorated, one side was undecorated. You could assemble these pieces into a finished product like this. This is an incense burner. you'd lift up this cover, place incense here, and the incense smoke would come out. So this would be for maybe someone's home, for rituals within the home. Another interesting thing about these figurines is the earlier figurines were made in households, in homes, by women. The later figurines were made in large workshops by men. So it looks like the way they organized production of crafts changed over time in order to increase the output. It was a thriving market in Teotihuacan, and because of the market, people, again, from the outside were attracted to move and live in Teotihuacan. So they found a grave of an individual where everything inside of the grave was from the Maya area. This was a Maya person who left the Maya area, moved to Teotihuacan, and lived out their adult life in Teotihuacan. Right? So Teotihuacan had a very wide influence over the rest of Mesoamerica. And by this time, the Olmec had disappeared for several hundred years. The Olmec, as you remember, were the ones who kind of got things going. They created the first chiefdom, the first complex society. And here in Teotihuacan, we see the first state. And there's nothing that could compare to Teotihuacan at this point. That is, there's no other city in the area as big as Teotihuacan. It's one major city in Mesoamerica. Okay, those soldiers that were shown were part of sacrifices. There were sacrifices within Teotihuacan. Those were 4 individuals. They were in the prime of their life, in their 20s. They had healed fractures that showed that they had been in some sort of intensive physical combat. And they also had these simulated human jaws and human teeth as necklaces. These were made out of stone to look like human teeth. So because they were in the prime of their life, physically active, and they had these kind of war trophies on their neck, these were most likely warriors. Yeah, the Pyramid of the Moon grew over time. So you saw a little bit when they were doing the detection with the muons, the natural radiation, to see if they could find hollow spaces within the Pyramid of the Moon. Part of this research has led to the conclusion that the Pyramid of the Moon expanded over time. In order to deal with the massive amounts of people moving in, you saw in the film that the state, the leaders in Teotihuacan, organized the construction of apartment complexes to house these people. So it shows that the state, the elites, the leaders, however you want to term it, were using building and infrastructure in order to deal with the mass of newcomers coming in. And you can see that most of these apartment compounds were standardized. They were built on kind of a similar plan. A large family unit, not just a nuclear family, but extended family would live here, and they would use crafts or make crafts within this household as well. On the walls, you saw that sometimes leaders were painted, as well as other scenes of daily life, including the ball game, which we'll talk about much more with the Maya. Right. As we talk about collapse, I just want to bring up the fact that your paper is on collapse of ancient civilizations, and I also asked you to think about what could potentially cause a collapse today. And this is the kind of thing I want people to think about, and I think it's become a little bit more noticeable with the situation we're going through now with coronavirus. That is, there is something we can learn from ancient civilizations. And as you'll see, a virus like coronavirus doesn't have to kill everybody for society to collapse, because what's collapsing is the organization at the top. And that collapse is not just due to people dying, but due to strain. Right? So it was the same with Teotihuacan. According to the archaeologists, there was a series of factors that finally led to social upheaval, right? And they could determine social upheaval from the selective burning of the elite structures. A wildfire did not go through the site, but it looks like the buildings associated with leaders were selectively burned. So it looks like something happened and caused so much unrest that people decided that they weren't just going to stick around. They were going to leave, and they took it out on their leaders before they left, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying that things are going to collapse here or in another country. I'm just saying that you could see how certain problems could potentially cause collapses in one country or another country. So from the evidence, what you saw, that the evidence one showed that trees were disappearing at this time. There was agricultural problems. They saw from the bones of people that there was growth interruption. People were starving. Even the elites were starving. They saw growing social stratification. The people who used to be able to get goods, there was a much less of that for many people, and there was a bigger gap between the very rich and the very poor. And then finally, burning of those structures, and then abandonment of the site. So if you had to point it to one main factor, you could say that the major factor was deforestation that caused agricultural problems. So it was human-caused problems. They caused their own destruction by destroying their local environment. Okay, so that's where we'll leave it off with Teotihuacan. And the next lecture we'll pick up with the Maya.